I found out my wife was sleeping with my college roommate at 3:42 p.m. on a Thursday, and somehow that still wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 90 minutes later when I opened her tablet, saw what they had been saying about me in private, and understood that they hadn't just betrayed me. They had been operating inside my life like a quiet demolition crew, patient, coordinated, and completely invisible until the whole thing came down. Before we move on, tell me in the comments which state you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's episode may touch a story that is still unfolding. I'm 40 now, and when I look back at the man I was before that Thursday afternoon, it feels like I'm reading somebody else's load calculations. Familiar numbers, wrong structure entirely. My name is Marcus Delian Webb. I'm a licensed structural engineer based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I've spent 15 years calculating how much weight a thing can hold before it fails. Bridges, high-rises, parking decks, renovation projects on old buildings that looked solid from the street but had been quietly compromising from the inside for years. I should have applied that same thinking to my own house. I had been married to Renee for 14 years. We met during my last year at NC State, got serious fast, and built the kind of life that photographs well. We had 2 kids, Jordan, who was 12, and Aaliyah, who was 9. I worked long hours, traveled to job sites across the Carolinas, and brought home the kind of income that kept everything comfortable and then some. Renee had stopped working after Aaliyah was born, which made sense at the time. The kids were young, I was earning well, and we agreed that having her home was better for the family than a second salary. For a long time, I believed that arrangement was a form of stability. I was confusing stillness with safety. An engineer should know better. The most dangerous cracks are the ones you can't see from the surface. Damon Fitch had been in my life since freshman orientation at NC State. We were randomly assigned to the same dorm room and became the kind of friends that felt like a permanent fixture. 22 years of shared history. Football Saturdays, late-night study sessions, standing in each other's weddings. When his first business partnership fell apart 3 years ago and he was looking at financial ruin, I was the one who answered the phone at midnight. I helped him restructure his LLC, connected him with 2 of my firm's smaller subcontractors, and even brought him in as a project coordinator on a residential renovation I was overseeing in Dilworth. Renee cooked for him when he came over for dinner. My kids called him Uncle Damon. I didn't let a stranger into my life. I handed a key to someone I had trusted since I was 18 years old. The day everything failed didn't begin with suspicion. I had driven out to a job site in Mooresville for a routine structural inspection on a commercial build. The general contractor called me at noon to say they'd hit an unexpected delay, a subcontractor no-show, and there wasn't much left for me to assess until the following week. I wrapped up my notes, got back in my truck, and headed south towards Charlotte about 4 hours earlier than Renee expected. She thought I'd be gone until 7. Jordan and Aaliyah were still in school. The house should have been hers alone. When I turned onto our street in Myers Park, I noticed Damon's black silver auto sitting 2 houses down instead of in our driveway. That registered somewhere in the back of my mind, the way a small number in a load table registers before you understand why it's wrong. I didn't stop to think about it. I figured he'd parked there to avoid blocking the street or was talking to one of the neighbors. I pulled into the garage, cut the engine, and walked in through the side door the way I always did. The house felt wrong immediately. Not loud, not chaotic, just wrong. The kind of wrong that a building feels when something load-bearing has quietly shifted 2 degrees off-center. Everything looks the same, but something underneath has moved. I set my laptop bag on the kitchen counter and stood still for a second. Then I heard voices coming from upstairs. Not the television, not a phone call. 2 voices. From my bedroom. I went up the stairs without deciding to. I remember my hand on the oak banister Renee had picked out when we renovated the 2nd floor 2 years ago. I remember the way the afternoon light cut through the hallway window. I remember my work boots on the hardwood and the bedroom door sitting open maybe 4 inches. I heard Renee laugh. Not a polite laugh, the real one. The one I hadn't heard directed at me in longer than I wanted to count. I pushed the door open. I'm not going to describe the scene in detail, because the details don't matter. What mattered was what I could read in the room before they saw me. There was no scrambling, No startled panic, no sense that I had walked in on some terrible first-time mistake born out of a weak moment. They looked comfortable, the way two people look when a place has become routine. Then Renee turned her head and saw me standing in the doorway, and the sound she made wasn't guilt, it was alarm. The alarm of a project that just got an unscheduled site visit. I didn't yell. That surprised me more than anything. I had spent 14 years believing that if something like this ever happened, I would come apart completely. Instead, I felt something in me go very, very quiet. The way a structure goes quiet right before it decides which direction it's going to fall. I looked at Damon and I told him to get out of my house, right now, this second. He started with, "Marcus, man, just..." I told him that if he said another word before he was fully dressed and out my front door, I was calling Charlotte-Mecklenburg PD and he could explain to the responding officer why he was half naked in my bedroom on a Thursday afternoon. He moved fast after that. I heard him on the stairs, and then I heard the front door. Renee started crying before his truck left the curb. She told me it was a mistake, that it wasn't what it looked like, which was extraordinary because it looked exactly like what it was. Then she shifted. She said we needed to talk calmly. She said I needed to listen. She used the word perspective like this was a budget disagreement and not my wife and our bed with the man who had stood beside me at our wedding. I told her to pack a bag and leave for the night. She told me it was her house too. She was right about that. And I could see her calculate it in real time. Could she hold the ground? Could she manage this the way she had clearly managed so many other things I hadn't been paying close enough attention to? Then she looked at my face and decided no. She packed a bag. She called her sister in Concord, and when her car backed out of the driveway, I walked back inside, sat down in the living room, and stared at the far wall for a long time. Then I got up and opened her tablet. What I found on Renee's tablet didn't just deepen the betrayal, it restructured it entirely. She had a messaging app I had never seen before, the kind that encrypts conversations and wipes automatically unless you save them. She had saved them. Either she forgot she'd left the tablet unlocked, or she'd grown so confident in my obliviousness that she stopped being careful. I clicked in and found 14 months of messages between her and Damon. 14 months! I had been calculating structural loads and managing job sites and coaching Jordan's Saturday morning basketball league for 14 months, while the two of them had been running a parallel operation inside my own life. The messages had everything: plans, hotel confirmations in uptown Charlotte and twice in Raleigh, complaints about me, jokes about how predictable my schedule was, updates Renee sent Damon about when I was on site, when I was in client meetings, when I was traveling overnight. She would text him my itinerary like she was sending a contractor a work order. The part that stopped my pacing and made me sit down on the kitchen floor wasn't the affair itself. It was how they talked about me. They talked about me like I was load-bearing infrastructure, useful, structural, completely taken for granted, something you build your life on top of without ever once thinking about what would happen if it wasn't there. I started screenshotting everything, every message, every date, every hotel name, every time Renee referenced my schedule, every time Damon confirmed he could come by because I was gone. I moved everything to a flash drive, emailed the full archive to a new account I created on the spot using a different device, and then kept digging. That's when I found the renovation money. Renee handled the household accounts. That had been our arrangement since she stopped working. I reviewed the joint statements monthly, but not line by line. I trusted the system because I trusted her. What I found when I finally pulled 14 months of transaction history was a pattern so clean it was almost admirable from a technical standpoint. Small withdrawals, $40 here, $80 there, sometimes $150, always below the threshold that would trigger my attention, always on days I was traveling or on site. When I added it up, it came to just over $19,000. Some of it I could trace directly, hotel charges I now recognized from the messages. Some went to Venmo transfers to an account I didn't recognize. And then there was the part that hit differently than all of it. About $6,000 of that money had come out of a dedicated account I had set up specifically for our kitchen renovation. I had been saving that money for 8 months. Renee knew exactly what it was for because she had picked out the countertops herself. She had used renovation funds to fund the affair. A structural engineer understands load redistribution. This was exactly that. She had quietly moved weight from one part of the structure to another and hoped the whole thing would hold until she decided it didn't need to. The next morning, I drove to the offices of Adrian Hollis, an attorney I had worked with once before on a commercial contract dispute. I set a folder on her conference table that was 3 inches thick by the time I was done organizing it the night before. She went through everything carefully. Screenshots, transaction records, hotel dates cross-referenced against my work travel calendar. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair, looked at me steadily, and asked me the question that reoriented everything. She said, "Marcus, what are you building here? A reaction or a result?" I told her I wanted a divorce. I wanted to protect my kids, and I wanted to make sure that not one more dollar left those accounts before the courts could draw a line around them. Adrian told me North Carolina was an equitable distribution state, which meant misconduct and financial misuse both mattered, but only if documented cleanly and moved on quickly. She filed within 48 hours. She also pushed for an emergency domestic economic protective order to restrict large withdrawals from our joint accounts while proceedings were active. That was when Renee started working through her playbook. She called me crying. Then she called me angry. Then she called me with a new voice, soft, measured, reasonable, the way you talk to someone you're trying to walk back from a ledge. One day it was, "Damon meant nothing. I lost my way. I need you to hear me." The next it was, "You were never really present, Marcus. You made me feel invisible. You were married to your work." She said that last part like it was a diagnosis rather than a deflection. Like 14 months of coordinated deception was somehow a reasonable response to a husband who worked long hours. I didn't argue with her. Adrian had told me early, don't get pulled into emotional calls that can get messy. If it's about the divorce, talk to my lawyer. If it's about the kids, keep it clean and keep it brief. Renee hated that more than anything I could have said. She was used to being the one who steered the conversation, and for the first time in 14 years, I wasn't following her lead. About a week into the process, Adrian called me with a question I hadn't anticipated. She asked whether Damon's contracting business involved any licensed reporting, compliance filings, or certified contractor documentation, because some of the dates in the messages didn't match up with where he had told certain parties he was working. I thought about it for a moment. Damon had rebuilt his LLC over the past 2 years. Part of how he'd done it was through a state-certified minority contractor program in North Carolina, one that required detailed project logs, certified hours on site, and compliance reports submitted to the program administrators. I had actually helped him understand the application process. I knew for a fact that falsified logs could result in removal from the program, clawback of any incentive funding received, and potential referral to the state licensing board. Adrian was careful. She didn't tell me what to do. She said if a program had been harmed by false reporting, and if I had factual information to share, I was free to share facts. I went back through the messages for 2 nights. I found 11 days across a 4-month stretch where Damon had texted Renee confirming he was at my house, sometimes from inside it, describing things in my kitchen, my living room, my driveway, on dates that overlapped with weeks he had submitted certified site logs claiming he was on active project work in Gaston County. He had been filing hours he never worked while using my home as his alibi location. I drafted the email to the North Carolina Minority Business Enterprise Compliance Office the next morning. I kept it stripped of anything personal. No anger, no backstory about the affair. I identified myself as a licensed structural engineer who had worked alongside the contractor in question, stated that I had documentary evidence suggesting his certified project logs contained dates that did not reflect his actual location, and offered to provide the specific dates and corresponding documentation for their review. I attached nothing explicit, just enough to point them toward records they could verify independently. Then I sent it and closed my laptop. I didn't call anyone about it. I didn't wait by the phone. I handed factual information to the institution that had a professional reason to care about it, and I let their process run. 3 weeks later, a former colleague who knew Damon called to tell me he had been removed from the state certification program and that his LLC had been flagged for a compliance audit. The incentive payments he had received over the past year were under review for potential clawback. He didn't lose that because I burned him down. He lost it because he got reckless while using my life as cover. There's a difference. That difference mattered to me. All of that, the legal filings, the financial evidence, Damon's professional unraveling, none of it was the hardest part of the first month. The hardest part was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after I caught them, sitting at our kitchen table with Jordan and Aaliyah across from me. They had known something was wrong almost from the beginning. Kids always do. The house had that particular tight silence that children sense before adults admit anything out loud. Renee hadn't been home in weeks. I had been keeping things normal with routine and meals and school pickups, but normal only covers so much when the shape of the family has visibly changed. I kept my voice as steady as I have ever kept anything in my life. I told them that their mother and I were getting divorced. I told them that she had broken the promises we made when we got married, and that she had done it with someone we all trusted. I didn't give them the ugly specifics. I didn't use them as an audience, but I also refused to dress it up into something soft and dishonest just to make the adults feel less exposed. Jordan looked at me for a long moment. He was 12, old enough to have already started assembling his own version of events. Then he asked me, very quietly, "Was it Uncle Damon?" He didn't call him Uncle Damon like a question. He called him Uncle Damon like a confirmation. I said yes. Aaliyah didn't say anything. She pushed back from the table and went to her room, and I could hear her through the ceiling, and it was the kind of sound that restructures something permanent inside a parent. That moment, not the bedroom, not the messages, not the $19,000, that was the worst moment of the entire first year. Watching my kids understand that someone they had trusted without thinking about it had been in our house under false pretenses. That the man who came to their birthday parties and helped Jordan with a school project on construction had been using access to their home as an opportunity. Renee tried to manage the fallout the same way she tried to manage me. She told the kids I was being rigid, that adults were complicated, that I was trying to make her look bad. The problem was that Jordan was 12 and paying attention, and the timeline wasn't complicated, it was just ugly. He started answering her calls in short, flat sentences. Aaliyah still needed her mother, still loved her, which was exactly right. She should. But even Aaliyah started asking questions Renee couldn't answer without making herself look worse. Damon tried to reach me 4 times by text, twice by phone. When I blocked every number I knew, he drove to my office building on West Trade Street and asked the front desk to call up to my floor. Security told him I wasn't available and asked him to leave. A mutual friend told me later that Damon was desperate to explain himself, that he wanted me to understand it wasn't supposed to go this far. A 14-month operation with hotel bookings and falsified schedules doesn't accidentally go anywhere. It goes exactly where it was pointed. About 6 months into the divorce process, Renee and Damon did what people do when consequences start arriving and they have no defense left. They tried to reframe the story. They posted photos together, smiling, uptown Charlotte in the background. The caption was something about finding peace after a hard season, which was remarkable considering they were the season. I was sitting at my kitchen counter with my phone when I saw it, and I felt something shift. Not rage, not jealousy, just a clear and simple recognition. Silence had stopped being restraint. It was starting to look like agreement. Adrian had warned me that social media posts during active divorce proceedings could create problems if I wasn't careful, so I was careful. I wrote one post, I kept it factual and grounded. I said that my marriage was ending because my wife had been involved with someone I had trusted for more than 2 decades, that the relationship had been ongoing for over a year, and that money from our household, including funds set aside for home renovation, had been used to support it. I said it plainly, and I said it once. Then I put my phone down and went to check on the kids' homework. By the time I picked it up again, the post had traveled far past my usual circle. Former classmates from NC State, colleagues across the Carolinas, parents from Jordan's school, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. The messages weren't asking whether it was true. Most of them already knew or had suspected something. The post just gave the truth a place to stand. Renee called me that evening, breathing hard and talking fast. She used the words defamation and harassment in the same sentence, which told me she'd spent the afternoon on the phone with her own attorney rather than thinking clearly. I let her get through the first wave, and then I told her one thing. If she wanted to dispute any fact I had stated, she was welcome to do it through counsel. And if she planned to threaten me, she should be ready to prove I had lied. The call went quiet after that. Damon posted something vague about complicated relationships and people who didn't understand private pain. It lasted less than 24 hours before he deleted it. The comments had not been kind. People had known him as my friend for over 2 decades. There was no framing available to him that didn't start with, "He was in his best friend's house." Renee deactivated her accounts not long after. They had spent 14 months living in private. Now they had to live in public with what they had chosen. The custody evaluation was where the case really turned. Renee's position going into it was straightforward. She had been the stay-at-home parent for 9 years. I worked long hours and traveled regularly for job sites. On paper, she believed that made her the obvious choice for primary custody. Her attorney leaned into it. He made it sound like she had been the entire architecture of the children's lives and I had been the funding mechanism. The evaluator, a licensed psychologist named Dr. Patricia Owusu, didn't work from assumptions. She interviewed both of us separately. She interviewed Jordan and Aaliyah. She contacted their teachers, their pediatrician, Jordan's basketball coach, and Aaliyah's dance instructor. She reviewed school communication records, medical appointment histories, and activity logistics going back 3 years. That review opened up things Renee hadn't prepared for. The records showed that I was the one who answered teacher emails. I was the one who scheduled and attended pediatric appointments, including 2 that required me to leave active job sites and drive back to Charlotte in the middle of a workday. I was the one who managed the school forms, the permission slips, the carpool logistics when Renee had other things she was apparently attending to. I coached Jordan's Saturday basketball league for 2 full seasons. I was the one who had driven Aaliyah to dance recital rehearsals on 6 consecutive Saturdays, while Renee was documented elsewhere, somewhere I now understood clearly. Renee had been present in the house, but presence and parenting are not the same load-bearing element. When the evaluator measured actual involvement against the assumption of involvement, Renee's structural advantage started showing its cracks. Then Jordan and Aaliyah were interviewed separately, and that's where the ground shifted permanently. Jordan told Dr. Owusu he wanted to live primarily with me. He said it clearly and without any of the hedging kids use when they've been coached. Aaliyah said she felt settled at home, the home she was in, the routine she had, the parent who had kept things intact when everything else was changing. She used the word settled. I've thought about that word many times since. Settled is not the same as happy. Settled means the structure is holding. For a 9-year-old girl navigating her parents' divorce, settled is everything. Renee's living situation wasn't helping her case. She had moved 3 times in 6 months. Her sister's house in Concord, a friend's apartment in Noda, then a short-term rental in Huntersville she could barely afford because the financial restriction order had limited what she could pull from our accounts. I had stayed in the family home in Myers Park. I had maintained the kids' school district, their routines, their Saturday activities, their bedtimes, their sense that the floor was still under them. Adrian told me early on, in North Carolina family court, stability isn't just a virtue, it's documented evidence. Dr. Owusu's written report came in 7 weeks after the evaluation began. Adrian called me on a Wednesday morning and read the key section aloud over the phone. The report stated that while Mrs. Webb had served as the physically present parent during the marriage, Mr. Webb had been responsible for a disproportionate and well-documented share of the actual parenting infrastructure: school communication, medical management, activity coordination, and consistent emotional availability. It noted that Mrs. Webb's post-separation living situation reflected a pattern of instability that had continued for an extended period with no clear trajectory toward resolution. It noted that both children had expressed a clear, consistent, and unprompted preference to remain in the primary care of their father. And it noted that the events leading to the separation raised questions about Mrs. Webb's judgment, decision-making, and prioritization that were relevant to the children's long-term well-being. The report didn't call her reckless. It didn't need to. The facts carried that weight on their own. When we went to court, Renee's attorney tried to compress everything into one narrative, a good mother who had made a personal mistake and was being made to pay for it in ways that went far beyond the offense. He was skilled. He knew how to make sympathy sound like logic. Adrian didn't try to match his emotional register. She stayed on the ground that family court actually stands on: stability, documented parenting, financial accountability, the children's stated preferences, the misuse of household funds, including the renovation account. She walked Judge Calvin Reese through 14 months of transaction records, the custody evaluation findings, and a timeline that showed, week by week, how much energy Renee had invested in protecting the affair, while I was carrying the structure of the household alone. By the end of Adrian's presentation, Renee was looking at the judge the way a building looks when the last redundant system has failed. Still standing technically, but nothing left to absorb the next load. Judge Reese's ruling came in sections, and every section mattered. On the family home, I retained it. I was required to buy out Renee's share of the equity at current market value, which was fair and expected. What changed the math was the financial misuse. The judge ruled that the $19,000 Renee had redirected from household accounts, including the $6,000 from the renovation fund, would be counted against her share of the marital estate. When Renee's attorney started to respond, Judge Reese simply moved on. The numbers were in the record. There was nothing to argue around. I watched Renee's face when that landed. For 14 months, she had been moving small amounts and trusting that no one was measuring. An engineer was measuring. On custody, the judge followed Dr. Owusu's recommendation with precision. I received primary physical custody of both Jordan and Aaliyah. Renee received visitation every other weekend, alternating major holidays and an extended period in the summer. Judge Reese stated clearly and on the record that this arrangement was not a punishment for marital misconduct. It was the arrangement most consistent with the children's stability, established routine, and clearly expressed preferences. That sentence mattered to me more than the rest of the ruling combined, because it meant the outcome wasn't about what Renee had done to me. It was about what was right for Jordan and Aaliyah. That's the only ground worth standing on. On spousal support, Renee received rehabilitative alimony, $1,100 per month for 3 years, contingent on her demonstrating active progress toward employment. Her attorney had pushed for open-ended support, citing 14 years out of the workforce. Adrian had argued that Renee was educated, capable, and had already demonstrated she could manage financial transactions with precision when it served her purposes, just not ethically. Judge Reese landed in the middle. The alimony was real, but it was not comfortable. It was a bridge, not a destination, and it came with a deadline. I could see from Renee's expression that she had walked into that courtroom expecting a softer surface to land on. What she got instead was a load-bearing truth. Choices have structural consequences. By the time the divorce was finalized, Damon's situation had continued to deteriorate. The state compliance audit came back with findings. He was required to repay a portion of incentive funding he had received during the period when his logs were found to be inaccurate. His LLC took the kind of reputational hit in Charlotte's contractor community that doesn't recover quickly. The construction and development world in this city is smaller than it looks from the outside, and word moves through it fast. He found work eventually, but not at the level he had been at and not in the same circles. Renee and Damon stayed together. I understood why, in a cold way. They had restructured their entire lives around each other and burned down too much to simply walk away. From what I heard through people we both knew, it was not the relationship either of them had imagined when they were planning it in secret. The excitement of a hidden thing rarely survives exposure to ordinary life. The bills, the logistics, the accumulated resentment of two people who know exactly what each of them is capable of. There is nothing cinematic about that. Once the secrecy is gone, what you're left with is character, and character had never been the strong point of either of them. I thought the papers would settle it. Then, nearly 2 years after that Thursday in Mooresville, I was back in Adrian's office. Renee had filed a motion to modify custody. She wanted to move to a 50-50 schedule. Sitting across from Adrian on that return visit, I felt something I hadn't felt the first time. Not panic, not anger. Just the quiet steadiness of a man who knows what his structure can hold. Renee's motion tried to sound reasonable. She said she was more stable now. She had found part-time work at a real estate firm in Ballantyne. She had a steady apartment. She said the children needed equal access to both parents and that enough time had passed for everyone to move forward fairly. Adrian reviewed the supporting documents and told me the case was weak. Jordan was now 14. Aaliyah was 11. Their preferences carried even more legal weight now than they had 2 years ago, not less. Stability of routine was still the court's primary consideration, and the track record of the existing arrangements spoke for itself. The updated evaluation was shorter this time, but it landed in the same place. Jordan told the evaluator, with the directness of a teenager who has had 2 years to watch and think, that he had no interest in splitting his time 50-50. He said his mother had made choices, and those choices had consequences, and he didn't think it was his job to make those consequences more comfortable for her. He was 14. He had arrived at that clarity on his own. I had never coached him toward it. Aaliyah was gentler, the way she always is, but she told the evaluator the current arrangement felt stable, that she had her room and her school and her routines, and that she didn't want things disrupted. The word again. Stable. I have built structures designed to carry enormous weight for decades. The most important thing I have ever built was a stable home for 2 kids who needed the floor to hold. Adrian noted that Renee had also fallen behind on her repayment schedule for the financial misuse. The court order required installment payments back into the marital estate, and she had missed several. Her attorney argued hardship, the judge acknowledged it and adjusted the monthly amount slightly, which simply stretched the debt across a longer timeline. The obligation itself didn't go away. The motion to modify was denied. I used to think winning would feel like watching something collapse. I thought I would feel it when Damon's certification was revoked. I thought I would feel it when the financial ruling came down. I thought I would feel it when the motion to modify was denied and Renee walked out of the courthouse having gotten nothing she asked for. None of those moments felt the way I expected. Winning turned out to be a Saturday morning in November, standing on the sideline of Jordan's 8th grade basketball game, watching him drive to the lane with his head up. It was Aaliyah showing me a drawing she'd done of the house, our house, the one that held, and asking if we could frame it for the hallway. It was cooking dinner on a Wednesday with both of them at the kitchen counter, arguing about something ridiculous, and realizing that the sound of ordinary life had come back to fill the rooms. It was knowing that I had been betrayed in one of the ugliest and most deliberate ways possible, and I had not let it turn me into someone reckless. I had not chased anyone down. I had not lit fires just to watch things burn. I had done what a structural engineer does when a load-bearing element fails. I assessed the actual damage, documented everything precisely, reinforced what could be saved, and rebuilt from the grade up. The most important thing I learned is this. You do not have to demolish yourself in order to hold people accountable for demolishing you. The consequences that matter most are the ones built into the choices themselves. You don't have to manufacture them. You just have to be patient enough to let the load find the failure point. If you're going through something like this, here is what I'd tell you. Stay calm long enough to see clearly. An engineer who panics at a crack misses the system behind it. Document everything before you say anything. Protect your children from the ugliness without lying to them. Find a lawyer who asks what you want to build, not just what you want to destroy. And don't confuse chaos with strength. The moment you start swinging just to feel something, you compromise the very structure you're trying to save. I'm not the same man I was before that Thursday in Mooresville. I'm more careful now about what I call load-bearing, about which relationships I let carry weight and how much and why. But I'm also more sure of what I can hold, and more grateful for the foundation that turned out to be solid all along. My kids, my work, my own character under pressure. The structure held. That's the whole story. If this meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it. And I want to hear from you. When do you think the real betrayal started? Was it the first message, the first hotel booking, or the moment they started spending renovation money? And if you were Jordan, 14 years old and watching all of this, What would you have said to your mother? If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching.